Venomous Stare back with another 2v2 cast. Let's introduce the players. Our protagonist of the game, Savagewood, playing blue Protoss. His ally is Draco, the blue Terran. Their opponents are going to be the red Zerg, Lyocanian, and Warjam, the red Terran. I've played with this guy Draco probably 10 times. He doesn't really have a distinct style and he's pretty average, so this isn't someone that I get into the game and know what they're going to do. A lot of the people on the 2v2 ladder will do the same build on every map for like the same one or two things. So often I can get into a game with a certain person and just straight up tell my ally he's going to go 3 Rax Reaper because that's what he does every game. Or he's going to go bio and then do 2-2-1 drop because that's what he does every game. You actually play with the same people in 2v2 quite a bit. Whenever it comes to playing 2v2, of course there's twice as many people as a fast expansion goes up here for Lyocanian. But what often happens is a game ends and everyone re-queues at once. So even if one of the people gets into a different game, very frequently you will either be queued with or against the same people multiple times. It's always nice whenever you have a worthless ally who flames you before he types out and leaves the game, and then you get him on the other team the next game. That's actually one of my favorite things in all of 2v2, as we see Savagewood grabbing a quick Nexus here, follows it with the Cyber Core, an Assimilator, and another Pylon. Looks like it's going to be 3 Rax Reaper here for Draco. If you ever see a Rax on the very corner of a base like this, especially when it's sort of in the closest rush distance spot possible, that's almost always going to be a Reaper cheese. You know, if you see a Rax like back here, not really necessarily indicative of a Reaper play, but in the early game when you see Raxes like this out on the exterior corner, almost always Reaper. And a lot of times as Zerg there will be little pedestals around the corners of the bases, so you can actually scout this pretty easily. The response to this as Zerg is just pumping mass ling, and oftentimes if you get pressured by 2 people, going into Roach can be helpful. The Reaper is not as strong as it was in 2016 when Beyond won the GSL and reigned supreme. Back then you pretty much had to tech up into Roach, and it was this very annoying thing where a good Reaper player would always be able to just shave off infinite numbers of lings, but the Reaper got nerfed pretty substantially, so if you just scout it and can pump mass ling as soon as your pool finishes and make Zergling speed as soon as the pool finishes, then you'll be good. However, this player has made the mistake of taking his second gas too early, a very common Zerg mistake. Now, this isn't to say that he was able to deduce what was going on by this Rax. That's sort of a tell that a more experienced player would pick up. It's not necessarily something everyone knows. Furthermore, knowing when to take your second gas as Zerg is very important. As we see some Hellions here, as Warjam, who's still on one base and has gone for Reactored Hellion, is going to try to help out his ally. And Reactored Hellion just absolutely decimates Reaper play, so this is nice to see. And notice he leaves the Hellions here on patrol for his ally, another good play. Roachhorn is out here, so Lyocanian could have been doing this as a response, or he frankly could have just wanted to go Roach anyway. If you're going to take double gas this early, this might be indicative of like a Roach rush, but if you watch an incredibly experienced and talented Zerg player like Liquid Snoop play, he won't actually take his second gas for a really long time. He absolutely maximizes his mineral income, as you see the Hellions go down there. And that's really important because maximizing your mineral income is really what you want to do with Zerg. I'm going to briefly lay out how I sort of view the different races macroing. As you see, Savagewood got a lot of mineral income here, and he's going to take gases 3 and 4. He has 4 gates, a Robo, a Forge, and a Twilight, so this is a very safe standard macro opener. Notice he's getting an Observer, already has one across the map, and this is just a brilliant place to siege your Observer up. The Expo is a little bit late here for Warjam. He did a very safe build, and the Zerg, let's see how he's doing worker-wise. The red team is decently behind Savagewood, but they are ahead of the aggressive Terran player whose expansion is just now about to finish. Warjam is starting to float out his natural and more Reaper prodding going out here. for Draco. One of the most irritating things to deal with whenever you're facing these Reapering players, especially in 2v2, is knowing when they're going to transition. Some of these people will just lay down an eBay and make a reactor and make Mass Reaper. A more intelligent, experienced player might elect to expand and halt the aggression. Another player might elect to go for a factory play, follow up with Hellion or a mine drop or something like this. Proxies, of course, are always an option, especially when a cheese like this is heavily committed to. Savagewood starts to take his third, throws down a battery and a cannon. That's always nice to see whenever you take your third base, especially on this map. You just want to go ahead and throw down that cannon battery combo. It'll do worlds of good. And on a map like this with a very open, easy to attack third base, a couple batteries are very good. Adding a few extra is always a good idea when you know this base is going to be pressured, which on this map it almost always is. It's right by the tower, which is by a huge empty choke, and it has two other ways to attack it. This is one of the hardest third bases to take in all of 2v2. However, once you establish it, these fourth bases and fifth bases can actually be not that bad. So this is how I sort of view macro for all three races. Let's start with Zerg because it's the simplest. You want to delay your gas mining, you want to make as many drones and queens as possible, cover the map in filthy creep, get map control with overlords, lings on the towers, and just make mass drone and mass expansion for as long as you possibly can. It's pretty simple. Now, when I say it's simple, I mean really in almost all scenarios when you're macroing with Zerg, it's all about squeezing out as many drones as possible. Obviously, because for Zerg everything comes out of the hatch. It's not like the other races where you can make workers and attacking units at the same time with no cost. And what I mean by cost is Zerg, everything is bottlenecked through their larva. This is a rudimentary concept, but it is the bread and butter of Zerg. Terran, the way I view Terran macro is the Terran is always trying to get up enough mineral income to mass produce bio and then push their bio across the map and constantly pressure their opponent. This is of course different with mech. Mech is more about building up your siege tank backbone or your battle mech backbone, but in general, Terran, we can't really generalize with every single different matchup. So Terran bio versus Zerg, this is what you often see. The Terran wants to get 3cc mule going, and they want to just do a parade push of constant pressure and keep the Zerg on the back foot. We see a hefty little roach tank marine play coming here. Thankfully for the blue team, there's no medevacs here. Savagewood is out here by his third base, but his ally completely has his dick in his hand and none of his stuff in a position to defend anything. Savagewood is in trouble here, and one of the I'm going to pause it here. So one of the most perplexing things whenever you're trying to hold off these Terran siege tank pushes, especially when they have a lot of beef and 2v2 from their allies, is just knowing how many tanks are actually back here. Sometimes it might look like, oh, he has a couple tanks, I'll run up and try to break it, and then there'll be 3 more tanks in the background, and right when you think you're finally going to break it, you get shelled into oblivion. So dealing with siege tanks can be very tricky because obviously the siege tank can park up in a spot to threaten your base, and you want to crush it and break the siege tank backbone, because often when you kill off all the tanks, the push will cease to be threatening. But just knowing how many siege tanks are involved can be very tricky. Now when you throw mines and liberators in the mix too, it's very, very difficult. I mean, forget about it. It's almost impossible to know whether you can hold it in terms of, oh, he has some liberators and some mines, I'm not sure where they're positioned. A good Terran player will always position his tanks in a threatening but safe spot and cover his tanks with liberator mine, and to me, those are the most infuriating and difficult Terran pushes to deal with, whether they be with Protoss, Terran, or Zerg. I play true random, by the way. So this guy has shit for brains. On this map, once you establish your natural, you pretty much park all your stuff out here neutrally, and then once you get your third going, you're in a position to swing by each side. Now, since this player doesn't even have a third base started, Savagewood is obviously going to leave his units by his third because he knows it's the most likely spot to be attacked. No reason at all to have all of your units camped in your main, especially considering the fact that there aren't even medevacs out yet. And it's just a very powerful ground push, and he's getting turrets, and he left the tank at home, so it's not like he's worried about a drop, okay? So all of his stuff is way, way late, and of course he doesn't really have any upgrades to speak of. Thankfully, Savagewood has been macroing well at home. He has a ton of workers, 68 workers, beautiful 3-base saturation. So if Savagewood can hold this push, he's teching into Storm and +2, and he has double Robo. Now I've explained how I view Talkin Macro and how I view Zerg Macro on a basic level. Protoss Macro is different. It's sort of this illustrious little dance that you're doing to try to get all your goodies. In many ways, I view Talkin and Zerg Macro as you're just trying to get enough money to throw units at them. Or in Zerg case, make a ton of workers first and then throw units at them. But with Protoss, it's more of a fine balance, and that's something that I think a lot of people who don't play Protoss don't really understand is Protoss players have all these cool tools in their tool belt that are infuriating to play against. Storm, Colossus, Disruptors. But knowing how you're going to get to those things and the steps that you're going to take to make sure that you're safe enough to do so is the thing that makes Protoss the most difficult to play. Now once you sort of establish all of your little goodies, you know, you have your Robo, maybe 2 Robo if you know what you're doing, you get Storm, maybe you get Colossus, or you get your critical mass of air. This is when things really get scary. So let's jump back into the game. Savagewood is sort of fighting by his little entrenchment, but with the tanks, he can't afford to sit here forever. These High Templar do not have the energy to Storm. Oh, they just got the energy to Storm. Storm just finished. But Savagewood does warp in a couple DTs. This is a brilliant trick to do whenever you are being pushed. Now, a lot of people might say, like, well, why don't you do a full warp gate cycle with DTs? Because then it's really obvious and they know. If you're facing a prolonged push, not necessarily a prolonged push, but a heavy push like this that could be prolonged, mixing in a couple DTs with your existing army is not necessarily the easiest thing to see, especially if your opponent is being harassed in the meantime. And it can really help whittle down the army to a point where you can clear the push. So Savagewood doesn't really take any worker losses. He's going to range out here and establish his 4th base. 3rd base of the Zerg just now gets done, and it's just now starting to be saturated as a lurker den comes down. The Zerg made a huge wave of Hydras fearing a counterattack, and Warjam intelligently backs up to this little Xel'Naga watchtower, and he's going to throw up turrets. This is another intelligent play you should aim to do in 2v2. In these very high traffic areas where you know there's going to be interference and things are always going to be fought over this area, throw up a turret. Turrets are inexpensive. You know, don't make 15, but if you make the odd turret, it makes hallucinations less powerful. It just decimates observers. If someone wants to go for any sort of like bulldog, aka drop stuff from up in the sky down on top of your tanks play, it makes that way harder. It's just in general a very intelligent, cheap thing whenever you're trying to help establish a defensive position. 4th base coming down for the Red Zerg, and Savagewood is continuing to get his goodies. Another battery cannon combo coming up. He's starting to get DT Blink, aka Shadow Stride. Notice how many gates Savagewood has at this point. Whenever you are macroing with Protoss, you always want to be liberal with the amount of gates that you make. You do not want to be bottlenecked by your gateways in the sense that, look at all this money Savagewood has. He's absolutely killing the income tab. Zerg is doing pretty well too, but Savagewood's 4th base has already been established, and the Zerg's 4th base is going to be dropped, so Savagewood will be way ahead after this. Savagewood's going to send a couple DTs out to do harass. Notice that this observer is seeing a very important area because you can spot a lot with this tower, and oftentimes your opponent will take this tower, and one of the DTs is immediately destroyed by Warjam. This would have been really bad for Warjam because that DT would have made it into one of these unprotected mineral lines most likely. As it stands, this DT is going to run into the natural. And you always want to do harassment whenever your ally is also doing harassment. That's actually the best time to do it. Because of course in StarCraft you want to make your opponent multitask, but in 2v2 you don't really have to juggle as much multitasking if right when you hit your opponent in the mouth, your ally is also screwing with them, because what happens right here, for instance, is the Zerg gets dropped, the Terran might be worried about helping a Zerg ally, and the Zerg is definitely going to be worried about saving his own base, so the units could be all out of position and the players are going to be distracted. We hear Savagewood running in for a big attack here as we see lots of Marines and Hydras. I don't know if Savagewood can break this. He has a lot of Storm though, and he's going to try to blanket the entire area in rain like Seattle, and he just drops filthy storms, does Savage Wood. Absolutely beautiful storms there, but he might not have enough army backbone to push through this. Immortals do pack quite a punch. Remember, he went for that double robo play, and he's going to recall and save some of those Immortals. Thankfully, he did snipe that tank. And the middle of the map, which was just a stronghold for the red team, was absolutely kicked down, and now the red team knows that they're behind. This third base was delayed, the DT is still out there. Savagewood does intelligently have a proxy gate coming. Interesting that Warjam was so liberal with these turrets. Again, I like this play, but the red team is going to try to push up into the third base of Savagewood, who's doing a lot more warpins. And this is why you want to make a lot of extra gates, because whenever you lose your whole army and you get counterattacked, you don't want to be sitting there with all of your warp gates on cooldown. As we see, Archon's screaming forward here and just monster moding the Marine Zerg army. Notice that lurkers were attempted to be made, and because lurker cocoons have such high armor, that was somewhat, it looked sort of like a micro trick, but really he was just trying to make lurkers. As we see, the CC might actually go down because it's on fire. The Zerg player, the red Zerg, doesn't really have very good creep spread at all, but he does have a decent economy. But at this point, the red Terran is very far behind. He hasn't been making medevacs diligently enough. Whenever you play with the Zerg ally, everything Zerg uses is biological, as we see lurkers get cancelled. So you want to be very liberal with your medevac use, because every medevac you make is going to help your Zerg ally. And Draco pushes forward with Savagewood. Notice Draco had pretty shitty upgrades. And if we look at what Savagewood had popping at the end of this game, it was just an absolute macro monstrosity compared to the other players. Terran stuck on 2 base. Zerg is just now getting his 4th saturated. And the Zerg, because he made that big wave of Hydras before the big wave of drones, everything is basically a step behind. Whether it be upgrades, drone saturation, amount of lurkers. And see, this is what always happens to me whenever I try to play lurker styles, and of course it's a common problem, it's not exclusive to me, is you lose a fight, you sort of lose footing, and then you try to retreat with your Hydras, and it's very difficult to be able to make the lurkers in time and be in a good position where you're not just caught with your pants down trying to make a bunch of lurkers. So we saw basically the full tech tree here from Savagewood, a pretty quick double robo, which whenever you see tank and ground Zerg play, we're talking like Roach Hydra ground Zerg, not just a bunch of links. That extra robo helps tons. Immortals, quite frankly, are some of the best units in the game. And in the same way that you don't want to be really frugal about building gateways, as you see Savagewood had a whopping 18 here at the end of the game, you don't want to sit here and be bottlenecked on one robo. If you find yourself queuing an Immortal up and then always having the feeling of, oh, I need another one, that means you need another robo. Sub for more.